This episode of the Better To podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and DM Needom, author of the Better To Burn Out series. Today, I would like to tell you a little bit about one of my favorite places, Synergy Collective, a bohemian lifestyle brand curating wellness for the mind, body, home, and soul. Located in the heart of the Midwest, Rockford, Illinois. Inside the storefront and online, you'll find a beautiful selection of crystals and metaphysical tools, boho apparel and accessories, sustainable home and beauty items, books, candles, and other unique gifts. They also offer a variety of community events, classes, and workshops in their Rockford location, including some select classes that are taught by me. So I invite you to explore the collective at www.shopsynergycollective.com and use code BETTER215 at checkout for 15% off your first online purchase. Welcome to the Better To podcast with DM Needom. I'm your host, Donna. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with my guest, Richard Sparks. He is an author, a television writer, a lyricist, and so much more. We are talking to him on a nice evening in London. So he was talking to us a little bit about the full moon, how beautiful it was. But the conversation isn't just about London or the full moon. It's about his career. It's about the books that he's got coming out and the series of New Rock, New Roll. And the thing is, I think if you're a creative and you get to listen to the stories and the people that he's talked to and worked with, it's a pretty wild ride. So tune in. Hey, Donna from the Better To podcast here. If you've listened to my show, you know that it always sounds great. That's thanks to the guys at Third Ear Audio Productions. Third Ear Audio helps podcasters, broadcasters, musicians, and business owners get their important messages out to their audience. Rich and the Third Ear Audio team are easy to work with. They're efficient and understand that your message is important to you. With quick turnaround and the true caring of your needs, Third Ear Audio is your go-to for any audio message. Reach out to Third Ear Audio at 312-388-5596. Rich and his team will deliver for you. That's 312-388-5596, or you could email them at info@thirdearaudio.com or visit them on the web at www.thirdearaudio.com. Hi, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm Donna. Very well, thank you.
Good. And you are coming to me from London, correct?
I'm in London, yes, at the moment. Yeah.
And you were saying before we got on air, he was talking about how beautiful the full moon is. And yes, we're about to have a full moon and things get a little crazy around those times.
I can see it right out of the window there. It's just, she's shining down on me.
So nice. Yeah. So nice. So let's talk a little bit. You have a long storied career as a writer, but the high adventure spice with low comedy, inspired by your love of online role-playing games, the New Rock, New Roll series is your first foray into actual fiction, correct?
It's my first foray into fiction, fantasy fiction. I've always regarded writing fiction as the highest form of writing. I was actually having lunch today with a producer who's bought the film rights and talking about it, because I'm quite an experienced scriptwriter. And I was, saying that film is a director's medium and stage is an actor's medium, and opera, I've written libretti, is a singer's medium and a composer's medium. Narrative is the writer's medium. That's just you and the reader, and of course the editor. Right. And we'll get on to my editor later because she's brilliant. It is, you're telling a story as well as showing it. In show business, you're always showing it. If somebody is telling you a story from the stage, that's a lecture. That's not a play. But in a book, you're telling it, you're showing it, you're bringing it to life. And it's just your narrative voice and the characters you create. So it's very much purer, in many ways, form of writing than the other forms, which are all excuse me, coughing, which are all collaborative. And they're great fun to work in. I've loved working with good directors and actors and producers, but this is different.
So when did you first get into writing as far as a career? When did you decide that I'm going to be a writer, whether it be for I know you were in British television, as well as you've done some movies and stuff. So what made you decide that I want to be a writer?
Well, when I was at university, I went to Oxford University, the same college as J.R.R. Tolkien, a little before my time, and also Philip Pullman, also before my time. So there's got to be something in the water there that encourages fantasy writing. Towards the end of my 3 years studying English language and literature, we all said to each other, "Oh, well, what are you going to do when you grow up and leave and stop being educated and get a job?" And I remember I said, "I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to write." And people said, "What, you?" Really? Because I'd written comedy shows at university, and they were done at the Edinburgh Festival, and we had one of our contemporaries went on to become a big TV star here, alas, no longer with us, Mel Smith. Do you remember the film The Princess Bride?
Yes, I do.
Film with Rob Reiner, where he played the man with albinism in that, with the long hair. He was a great friend of mine.
Nice.
So I was writing all these things, but for some reason, no. Oh, you're going to do it seriously, are you? I did. I got a job in Welsh television for a couple of years, and they were very good to me. I got to actually write some scripts, which I wasn't. I was hired to do continuity, but one of the producers said, "Oh, you write scripts. Do you want to have some?" And I said, "Yes. Get some credits." And I left that after 2 years because I just wanted to write. And some years I succeeded, and other years I was being very polite to the bank manager.
Well, and that's the thing about being a writer, or even you can even take it out of just writing, being in the entertainment industry, period. I worked on a small TV production, and I often joke that it was the best summer job I had because we produced 6 episodes, and it was a thing of, how do I say this? When we worked, I was working 24/7 basically. I slept when I could because I had so many hats in this low budget production. But the thing is, when it was done, it was done. The money was gone. There was nothing left to do. So it's like, if you can get the work in the entertainment industry, do it. But
That's completely true. But the converse of that is, when the work dries up, now's your chance to do the good work.
Yeah.
When you're not getting I've done some mediocre work and some good work and some turkeys. And the turkeys, however hard you do your best, you're paid to try and write the script and work with people, and you do the best you can. But when you get a chance to go and do, oh, hello, dear.
Sorry, I heard you coughing.
Oh, my wife has heard me coughing. Thank you.
It's honey and ginger.
Honey and ginger. Wow.
Nice.
So when you're not being paid, that's the time to really do the good work. The whole idea of you're not a professional writer unless you're being paid is absolute rubbish.
Yeah.
If you're going to be a writer, write. However easy or however ill paid, write.
Well, I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of people will contend with. Well, when do I say I'm an author? If you've sat down at your computer and you have a story or your typewriter or a notebook, and you have an idea in your head and where these characters are going to go, you're an author. I mean,
Yeah,
you're
completely.
But there's such that stigma of, well, I can't say I'm an author until I've actually published.
It's you. This is where you start.
Mm-hmm.
I completely had that, and I have a friend who's a composer. He wouldn't compose unless he was paid. So he went into academic. He's a very good teacher, professor, did very well. But you've got to take the opportunities to do your art and love it, and not put it behind the money. That's not what validates you. What validates you is doing good work. And sometimes the best work you do loses money.
Right.
But you learn stuff and you work with great people. And it's, maybe an amateur, not an amateur, like going to the Edinburgh Festival is expensive. But my goodness, you're surrounded by really high quality work. And, if you can swim rather than sink up there, you've learned something, you've achieved something. And nobody else is going to do it for you. So there's no point in sitting around waiting to be discovered in a Schwab's store like Lana Turner and saying, "Oh, you're going to be a movie star. Come with me." It very rarely happens. You've got to push your way in.
Well, and one of the things I think people miss out on because they're looking at such the financial aspect of it is, when you're writing and you tell your story and you finally put your story out there, it can be rewarding just knowing the feedback from some stranger that you made them emotionally connect to something that you created and gave birth to. It may never make a penny, but knowing the satisfaction of connecting with somebody on a different level can be so fulfilling.
I've had this It's absolutely amazing. And the what you first of all tell yourself is the only thing that matters is doing the good work, getting the work right. And so it's as good as it could be. But when it gets that next step and you get the feedback, you realize there's a whole world beyond that. So you focus on doing the job, but when the reader focuses on doing their job and they come back to you with and I can tell you two quick stories about this. I wrote an opera for the Los Angeles Opera composed by Lee Holdridge, who's a wonderful composer. He did many things, Beauty and the Beast, the TV series that George Martin was a writer on, George R.R. Martin. And we did a 1 hour opera to involve the Hispanic community. It was for the outreach program. And the girl who did the lead now is a huge worldwide opera star, Daniel Denise. And the woman who played her mother, or her abuela, her grandmother, was a singer called Susana Guzman. And she was shopping in a market in Los Angeles one day. And a girl came up and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And Susanna was like a challenge, a rather alarming looking kid. And Susanna said, "No." She said, "I was in Journey to Cordoba." And then she completely melted and talked about how she was in the chorus for her community theatre in school. And Susanna said, "Oh, God, that's so exciting. Thank you. And what are you up to now?" And the girl said, "Nothing like that will ever happen to me again. I'm stacking shelves here in the supermarket." But that moment of something connected with someone where she did it. And another book I wrote was the biography of the lovely lady who just brought me my honey and lemon drink. Her father was a very eminent music producer, Milt Okun, who produced John Denver, Peter, Paul and Mary, Brothers Four, a major producer, arranger. And a young-ish, well, he's now 30, friend, nephew of a friend, he reads that book every 2 months.
Wow.
He's in the music business, and he's always like, "What would Milt do?" So he goes back into the book for the wisdom of my father-in-law, which I recorded and put together. What would Milt? And every 2 or 3 months he rereads that book, and that's great. That's something that's made a difference to someone's life.
And that's a gift. I mean, that's a gift for that's a gift for you knowing that, and it's a gift for them because it's something that they hold near and dear. I remember when I wrote a romantic suspense book, and I had somebody from Australia. She won it in a contest. I had given her a copy. She won it, and then she promoted it. But she promoted it she promoted it several times over, but she promoted it with like some bigger name authors. And this was my second book, and I was just like,
Nice.
wow, okay. I mean, it was an honor. And in that first moment of hearing, I picked up the book and I planned on reading it for a little bit, but then I couldn't put it down.
Yeah, that's nice.
Those were always those moments of like, really?
But that reader doesn't know that you don't belong with those other big authors. They've seen a book that speaks to them just like those books do. I mean, for example, if you're doing a small theatre play in London, like several I've done in my younger days, the same audience comes to see you as is going to the National Theatre the next night or to see Star Wars the next night. People are very, very wide-ranging in their tastes, and you're up against everybody else. And if they like you as much as they liked, Ian Holmes' King Lear or The Empire Strikes Back in a different way, that's you're part of the landscape of their art, really, the reader's art.
True. I do have to ask this though. I mean, because for me, I've said this, and the fact is, there are times occasionally when you get to a certain point, when you're on to your next project, that you're like, what if I can't do it? That whole imposter syndrome thing. I mean, have you ever suffered from that yourself?
Oh, doing it all the time. The New Rock series, I've written 4 books in the series now. The first one we'll talk about later has just been published last month. And I remember in the 3rd book just being completely banned because I tried to make it really difficult for me and the characters. How can I make this absolutely impossible? So that was a struggle. And then looking back, of course it worked. And now I'm in the early stages of book 5 and I'm circling the drain again. So you're always, you never have, look, I wish I could take my own advice. Listen to me being wise and this is the answer and how to do this. And, but it's life is lived forwards and understood backwards, as Kierkegaard said. And when you're writing something, it's never been written before. You don't know. You know where you're going, where you should
Right.
do, and you know where you started. You don't necessarily know how you're going to get there. And characters and events leap out of the woodwork and surprise you, and you go, "Oh, yeah, that's interesting." So you've got to keep an open mind while still plotting and planning, and it's different every day. And at the moment, I'm in the early stages of book 5, and I'm as confused as you are.
So are you a plotter or a pantser or a combination?
You have to be both. You can't be one. The most important thing to do is work out your ending. And I don't necessarily mean the ending of the plot, but where the book lands, where the story ends, where it lands, what's the feeling? So you've got this notion for a story. Okay, this has got to pay off somehow. How does this pay off? I mean, think of it in terms of a whodunit. Somebody killed the person. Who? You know, that's what an expert whodunit writer would think. My things are puzzles and adventures and quests and confusions and what the hell's going on all the time. So at the end of those, I've got to know where it's landing, but you don't have to know what happens in the 400 pages or whatever it is until you get there. That you discover as you go along. And then I'm always rewriting outlines, and as I write but basically I'm sort of a pantser to start with, and then I got somewhere I add that chapter to the outline and see where that A story, B story, C story, however many you're knitting together, where they fit, and you keep it's an editing process as much as a writing process.
Oh, yeah. And I have to laugh because what you said about the ending, my first book, I had this ending in my head. I had it planned out. I had wrote it out, and I was taking my husband to dialysis, and I get the character in my head going, no, that's not how you're going to end the book. And I'm like, oh yeah, it is. It's already done. It's like, I got a better idea. So I changed it. Came home and I sat down and I wrote out what the character had showed me. And because he was like, I'm going to give you a series now.
That's tremendously important because it's not what you want; it's what the story wants. And if you're driving the story where it's square peg into a round hole, it's not going to fit. You've got to be open to where it wants to go. But I'm not talking about where the plot ends. How does the whole thing land? What's the explanation for it? That you need to know. You don't need to know anything else because you work that out as you go along. But if you know where you're landing, then the story will reveal itself to you, and it will give you different twists. And you may write an ending quite near the beginning of the book, and then later, as you discovered, that's not your ending. But if you hadn't written that and gone through it, you wouldn't have come to the true ending.
Exactly. And I mean, for me personally, there's times when a scene will pop in my head that may not be for this book. It may be for 5 or 6 books ahead. And I sit down and I write that scene out, and I will use it. Hopefully, eventually it may get tweaked. It may get changed completely, but I get that out. And I think that's an important thing as a writer, to get those little bits out.
Keep your options open. I was once working on a doomed musical with a brilliant director called Albert Marr, who created Kismet, Man of La Mancha. He was the creating director of many shows like those two. And we didn't have a lyricist. So I said, well, I've been writing lyrics for years. I can do it. And he could sort of think of rolling his eyes, or someone who thinks he can write lyrics, So I actually wrote one, gave it to him, and thank goodness the first one was fine. It's just what needed. And so he gave it to the musician, and that was done. And then I think about the third lyric I took to him, he was this wonderful old Jewish New York lizard, Look, no, after a day's rehearsal, he was, knackered. And he reads the lyric and he goes, well, this is fine, but it's for entirely the wrong show. Great lesson. So, that's what you've written, maybe for an entirely different book. And you may have a scene for another book waiting to be developed into a sapling that becomes a forest.
And I think it gets us out of that moment, like you were discussing, where you feel stuck. You can't write anything else. You're working on a book, but you can't go there right now. So you need to distract yourself. I remember I started creating, it was back in the end of 2020. It's 2 books out, or beginning of 2020. And I had 2 books out, and I'm like, I'm stuck. I'm stuck. So I started creating character Bibles because being the TV background, I
Yeah.
decided, let me make Bibles for my characters. So I did. I gave them their backstory, I gave them everything. And lo and behold, if a character that I had not done anything with decided that he wanted to be a main character in my book, and he was just a little side character in one, I ended up writing 82,000 words in the next month. But the
Yeah.
thing is, they'll never see the light of day, the full novel, because it's not where I wanted to go. But I got it out.
Not the matter where you want it to go, it's where it wants to go.
Right. And it's
The
like,
two of you've got to work together. You've got to work with it, not against it. And you've got to let it lead.
so
That's great. Yes, characters leap out of nowhere and they surprise. That's the nice thing about writing a series, is that I've been able to, go back to characters in book 1 and they're major part of the fun in book 3 or book 4 or whatever. And they're familiar to the readers by then.
well, tell us about your series.
Well, it just fell out of the sky with one morning in the 1st of June. And it just hit me on the head like an anvil falling onto Wile E. Coyote. It was just extraordinary. Because as I said, I'd been playing multiplayer role-playing games, sometimes, with 24 people in my earphones all over the world. And we're going to attack other factions of 24 other real people in player versus player. And either we win or we get wiped, as they say. And so I was just thinking, what would it really be like to be as a heroic battle mage, who could cast spells and heal his companions? And what would it really be like to be that guy in a world like in a world like that? Not in a game, but in that kind of a world. And well, there's only one way to find out, and that was to write it. It was just so obvious. So we start off with the idea of 3 people. The only one we know is a retired English school teacher, a bit like me or my father, who's discovered his love of gaming in his retirement and just spends all day online with his best mates all over the world, one of whom is an Asian American sword dancing girl who's the DPS, damage, dual sword wielding, deadly, fast as the wind, hits like a hurricane. And the other one is an Australian orc. So he's a massive great brute with a battle axe. So they're his 2 best friends. They're unstoppable. They win the world championship of sword and sorcery online, live with tens of millions of people watching. And the next thing he knows, he's being whizzed off and dragged away and find himself standing on a hillside with a crappy sword and a shield in the middle of nowhere going, what the actual F? What's going on? And there's no sign of the others. So and he can hear wolves getting closer. So the first job is to survive and then find out where he is and eventually what happened and why. And it's all explained. There's a reason. It's all explained in with him. It has quite a lot of comic elements in it, being a lifelong comedy writer as well as script writer. You can't resist.
No.
Comedy belongs with fantasy because adventures are all about fear and pain and misery, just like comedy is. They fit. Comedy is not nice people telling jokes. That's a dinner party.
And just like life, though. I mean, and I've referred. I actually did a thing yesterday for content creation about the fact that sometimes life is like a video game. We think that we have achieved everything. We've gone on all the missions. We've faced the big boss, and everything is good. And we started another little quest, and here's the big boss again.
There's next, yes. But the thing is, what I am talking with my mates in my various guilds and groups, we all came to realize there are only 2 quests. We call them kill or FedEx. Go and kill something or go and fetch something. It's different with PvP when you've got a gang of you all fighting another faction. But in narrative in book forms, I can write, if you'll forgive me swearing, what the F is the quest?
You can curse.
The guy's going, what is happening here? It's not, there's no quest giver. I mean, I'm stuck in this medieval sword and sorcery. I don't even know if there's any magic here. And I've got a sword. I was a battle mage. What's going on? And, immediately things get worse. He gets captured and dragged off to be sold as an outlaw. Well, and then he trains up in the army and gets, and gradually he meets one of his mates and then the other one, and the team reforms. But by when they're trained up and they're pretty good, because obviously you get to the world like that, you're not going to be an expert immediately, are you? You're going to be hopeless. Just because you were good at mapping a keyboard Doesn't
Well,
mean you're going to be able to actually do a real sword. What the hell do I do with this thing?
it's like my daughters, they would watch ice skating. They would watch ice skating when they were little, and they would like, oh, and we went to an ice skating show, see Chris Yamaguchi and everything, and they were all thrilled. And they're like, they would go out in the backyard and act like they were on ice skates and do the jumps and everything. And so their grandmother's like, well, put them in ice skating lessons. Okay.
Yeah, the first thing they
Oh
do,
yeah, that
all over.
they were
Yeah,
like, this is so much harder. I'm like, yeah.
yeah, it's absolutely. Which is why, I mean, this is under my editor, who's brilliant. She was the one who said, look, you've got to make it harder. They can't immediately get good. Well, they didn't. But it's got to be every time they slightly improve, it's got to be a struggle. It's not, of course it all comes back eventually, otherwise they wouldn't be very good heroes. But it's got to be a learning process in that world.
In your bio, it says Rowan Atkinson performed his Schoolmaster sketch in John Cleese's The Secret Policeman's Ball. What part of that did you have to handle?
Well, Rowan came to Oxford University the year I left. He was a mature student from Newcastle, studying electrical engineering, I believe. So my friend Peter Wilson and I did 2 more shows at the Edinburgh Festival after we left as a double act. I wrote them basically, and Peter was the funny one. And they were fun. There was my vacation, to my 2 weeks of vacation of a year. And in one year, the current Oxford Student Review came to support us. They came to see our first show and were great. And that's where I met Richard Curtis and who else? Helen Atkinson Wood, I think, and maybe Angus Dayton. Well, I met them all eventually. And Rowan was there. And then a couple of days later, we went to see their show. And Rowan did this extraordinary sketch. He came with his hair out and a piece of paper in his hand and tried to give a bit of torn paper to the audience. He'd go walking around going, blah, 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 doing Rowan faces. Which, I mean, he's so invested in what he does. And my friend and I just turned to each other. We just did, what are we seeing? It was so much the real thing. And the audience didn't really know whether to laugh, what was going on. So he was already by that time he's the new Peter Sellers as a student. And he actually had I think, a more distinguished career than Peter Sellers is, because the variety of what Rowan has done has been extraordinary. So the Peter Wilson, my scene partner, and Rowan were asked to do a small stage show at Hampstead Theatre. This was like 1970, what, 8? For which I was one of the writers, and so was Richard Curtis, and the director was Michael Rudman, and Peter Wilson's then wife was the third leg on the stool. And it was, it had some really sour reviews. Very unfunny show at Hampstead, but it was a very prestigious theatre, and some bits were good, and clearly Rowan was making waves. And one day I thought, I can't just write for my friend and his wife. I've got to write something for the new guy. That's what I remember thinking in the morning. So I woke up and I started writing a list of silly names, and then I thought, well, this is promising. Let's add it. There should be a sketch at the end of this. So there was. Then I've got it. Look, I've actually got it here. This is the original manuscript of it, which I was showing someone today.
Nice.
All the way from 1978 with all the crossings out. And so then I typed it up. I don't have the typescript because I gave it to Rowan that morning in rehearsals. And I gave it to him. I said, here, this is for you. And he was all looked at me and went, well, and it wandered off. And I thought, well, at least he didn't tell me it was crap. At least he told, oh, good, it's delivered over to him now. Yeah, so anyway, and the first time Rowan did it in rehearsal, I mean, extraordinary. He was in an empty room with just the director and me. And he just ate it completely alive. He populated the room with non-existent schoolboys and worked off each of them. And so when he did it, it was, it really worked. And then a year later, I'd been sent off to New Zealand to do a TV series, which bought me a house. That was great. So I came back in the spring, the summer, and Rowan called me up and said, John Cleese just telephoned. He wants me to be in his new charity show, and can I do the Schoolmaster? It's all go here, isn't it? Sorry.
Okay.
So I said, yes, we can. So we met at a pub called the Captain's Cabin and walked down to the theatre and then went in the back stage door, and there were Billy Connolly and Pete Townsend of The Who and Peter Cook and several Pythons and John Cleese. And Rowan introduced me to John and blah, 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 blah. And in the actual show, Rowan was completely unknown. No one had ever heard of this guy. And he came on stage, did the sketch, and I'd seen him do it 30 times, so I knew how it worked. And he walked off on stage an unknown and walked off a star. It was extraordinary. Got a great ovation, just absolutely owned the room. And I discovered years later that Roger Grafe, who directed it, fought tooth and nail to keep Rowan in it because it was like a 4 or 5 hour show for the BBC, and they wanted to cut it down to a manageable length. And they said, we can't have this unknown guy in it. And Roger said, it's the best thing in it. You've got to keep that. It's the next generation. This is the company. We can't just have the old Pythons. Yeah. It's next. So thank you to Roger for doing that. And obviously thank you to Rowan for being so brilliant. He had his writing relationship with Richard Curtis anyway. So we did some other things together, like I contributed to Not the 9 O'Clock News a bit, but Rowan and Richard were always writing. And that sort of fruition with things like Blackadder, which was brilliant. And then, especially when they brought Ben Elton in to be a writing partner with Richard, the scripts got really, really good. And a cast to die for, all the talent. So I was, very, very little to do with Rowan's actual career, but I wrote the first thing that sort of got him noticed, and that's really lovely to have had a small part in it.
Well, I mean, and I gotta ask you this. I mean, being able to walk into that stage, that studio area, and seeing all those people that you saw, were you Ted starstruck? Because I mean, the Pythons were there.
Yeah, absolutely. I get starstruck just like anyone. If I excuse me. Yeah. I mean, they were heroes of mine. I later became friends with several of them because there was a small boutique literary agency called Jill Foster Limited. And Jill had, I think, about 25, 30 clients at the most. And it was several Pythons. Most of them left, but Graham Chapman stayed. But Michael Palin and Terry Jones were with her until they all went off and had a sort of Python company. And Douglas Adams was one of Jill's, Hitchhiker. And I'm really annoyed that Douglas managed to die in like 1998 because A, he was a great friend, brilliant. And see, if he was alive now, he might say something nice about my book that we could put on the cover.
I'm sure you would. I'm sure. And it's always good to have those nice little well-known people say something about it.
Or I could tell the stories about. I got lots of Douglas stories, some of which I'd have to know you a bit better. But I was having a drink with John Lloyd, who created Blackadder and Not the 9 O'Clock News, and was Douglas's writing partner on Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the first season, as the radio show. And he said, Douglas was hopeless at everything except having brilliant ideas. Great. And they were roommates. They were, they lived together, wrote together. And so, I mean, Douglas, he was brilliant, but he quite often really didn't like writing. And one time his publisher summoned him to a hotel out of, coming down for lunch or something, way outside London. And when he got there, he locked him in the room and said, right, you're not coming out till you finish the book, which was 2 years late.
Oh.
I mean, these stories have all been exaggerated by whichever one of us is telling it.
Oh, yeah.
It's sort of there's more than a kernel of truth in it. Yeah.
Well, isn't that always the case?
Yeah, he was brilliant. I'm just, much missed. He married a great friend of mine. He was at Cambridge and I was at Oxford, and Jane Belson, his wife, was in my year at Oxford doing English. So, we were in the same classes and had the same friends. And she's also no longer with us, but
I wanted to touch on, because we were talking about the idols too, that your lyrics that you had written. You had Dom de Luise, which I know some people don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to fathom that when I would say Dom de Luise, that there's a group of people that don't know who he is, but I'm sure there are because people don't know 80s music groups sometimes now. So, but Eric Idle, Vanessa Williams, how did that all come about for you in your career?
Excuse me. Basically through my relationship with Lee Holdridge, the composer, he got asked to compose a full Oscar score for an animated film called The Secret of Nim 2, which was a sequel, and not a very good one, to The Secret of Nim. And the MGM who produced it, MGM animation department, they thought they wanted a whole Oscar score so they get nominated as best song. And so Lee asked me to, because I write his lyrics, he asked me to write the songs. And one of them, Eric playing the bad mouse, he did a song that he's tempting his brother to come and be evil. So I did a rip-off of Nancy Reagan's Just Say No motif. It's called Just Say Yes. say, come along, we can rule the world together. So that's up on YouTube. Eric was delightful and gave it 110%. Let's see. Dom de Luise was one of the other singers in that film. Vanessa Williams was something with Plácido Domingo's Christmas show in Vienna, early 2005-ish, something like that. A composer called George Calandrelli had a song and sent it to me for some words. And he and Domingo and Vanessa did it as the encore number at the end of the show with the Viennese Philharmonic Orchestra.
Nice.
Who were pretty good.
Nice.
Domingo's, extraordinary talent.
So you wrote nonfiction books, Diary of a Mad Poker Player. Were you a mad poker player at one point?
Well, yeah, this was the poker boom in the early 2000s when Chris Moneymaker won a seat in the World Series of Poker main event and then went on to win the thing. There were lots of schmucks like me who thought, well, if he can do it, so can I. So I wrote a sort of comic, light-hearted adventure through the world of that was then new, which was internet poker. And that went well. The publisher asked me to write a sequel. So the sequel is actually a much better book because in that I'm doing less about me and poker, but I interviewed people who ran a cheating ring, for example, and I interviewed some of the top players in the world, and I got a former world champion to teach me, to coach me, and that year I did win a seat in the World Series of Poker. And that was great. And I played in the main event 3 times. And that leads on to fantasy because my daughter got into fantasy very, very early. And one year I said, playing in the World Series of Poker, you have days off all the time because if you survive one day, you're not playing for the next 2 days. I'll need something to read. What do I do? She said, oh, buy this book, The Game of Thrones. So I said, all right. Went and got that at Barnes and Noble, read the whole lot. Mm-hmm. Not that week. That was the year I came within about 50 places of making some money. Lasted days and got nothing. Anyway, it's great fun. You learned a lot. And because of that, I've now got businesses in Las Vegas, that week probably got me back into fantasy as much as anything else did. When I realized, George Martin is such a good writer. And I just thought this is what I really like. This is what I love.
Is this kind of what pushed you toward the online role-playing gaming?
I think it did. Online poker. There's a bit of a pattern here. Is online poker, fantasy, and then role-playing games coming out. First of all, standalone ones that you play with your own computer, and then the multiplayer, massive ones. I remember listening to my daughter's friends when she was at high school. This was in the 2000s. And they were talking about their adventures in World of Warcraft. I thought, that sounds really good fun. I'm probably too old for it. And a few years later, I'm deep in the bowels of all those, Elder Scrolls and Dragon Age and Mass Effect, the outer space games. And they're just great. I often say for older people, if you've still got the yearning for adventure, but you don't have the knees for it anymore, sit down and do it from the pleasure of from the comfort of your own home.
Well, and I think that's the thing when we talked a little bit before we got on camera here about the fact that they put everybody in a box, and if you're too old, you shouldn't be wearing that. You shouldn't be doing that. Why not?
I know, but then and that also leads into another fantastic point, which is online, in game, we're all who we want to be. Everyone is accepted. You know, you say you're some kind of elf or some kind of this or that or the other. Nobody questions it. You know, you're male, female, orc or unicorn or whatever. That's your avatar. That's your character, and it's all inclusive. And that is really, you know, it's a big issue at the moment, is people being accepted for what they want to be and what they are and what they believe themselves to be. And in game, we're all, this is my main character, this is who I am in game. And it's nice to pretend to be someone else, even though it's, you know, I never really pretend to be anyone but me, but you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, as a writer, you know, let's be honest here, as a writer, that's one thing. When I was in acting class, I took something that my acting coach told me, and that was to live in the moment. And as a writer, if you're truly writing fiction, you're living in that moment.
Oh, absolutely. I was reading an article about this the other day, and it was sort of lifestyle thing in the London Times, I think, talking about the flow state and how good that is for you to get into and how to get people in. I've been doing that all my life. When you're writing, you're in a flow state. That's what I never realized that. I mean, I'm really lucky to have had that experience all the time. When you're writing, you're flying. It's like being an actor in a play.
And I think people that, you know, that's one thing. A lot of people are like, well, I'm not creative. Who told you that, and what made you decide that? And I think that goes back to education, our education system, because we're taught that, well, you didn't. I remember having an art teacher. Okay, I straight up, I've told people this before. I flunked art. How do you flunk art? The only way you flunk art is a personality conflict. So I had a teacher. I went to an all-girl Catholic high school. I had a teacher who saw my little still life. She came over. She says, "That's not right." So she sketches over, and I go back and I sketch. And art is your perception, is it not? Yes. So.
I mean, yes, with the caveat, if she's trying to teach you helpful technique,
she is.
That's part of it. But on the other hand, you are completely right.
She is.
It's how you see the world.
So she does this about 6 or 7 times. She comes back over, and she at this point, I am just like, okay, she really wants me to. So what I did, being the smart ass that I am, I traced over exactly what she did. Traced it over perfectly. Right. She comes back over and she looks at me and she goes, "That's not right." And I looked at her and I said, "Well, that was what you drew, and I traced over it." Well, that moment on, I was on her shit list for the rest of the year. And in fact, she's like, "If you bring me Chinese red peppers for my cooking class, then I'll go ahead and pass you." And my mom said no. So I flunked art. And when I went to my next school, because we moved, my art teachers loved me. But so how do you flunk art? You flunk art because of a personality conflict.
Well, my wife used to teach art at the Chelsea School of Art here, in the photography department. She always said to the students, I'm not going to tell you how to do anything. If you've got a question, you come to me.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's how you stifle creativity is, I mean, yes, you have to learn technique. But when we're doing a pencil drawing of a still life, there's not so much, there's not so much hardcore fast rule that you got to do it exactly this way. Because can you imagine somebody doing that with Picasso?
Well, if that was the case, then all of us poets we'd just still be writing rhyming couplets like in the 18th century. Things moved on. The Romantics came along. They discovered other rhyme forms. Now, rhyme and scansion and form have been thrown out of the window by a lot of poetry teachers entirely. So, the game changes all the time.
And I was talking to a director yesterday, and he's a writer-director, and we were talking about the fact that every story has been told. It is now a matter of your execution of it. Because, the simple basic plot points have all been told, but you can mix them all up. You can put it all together. No, you got a different take? Okay, do tell me, sir.
It's so wrong. It's absolutely so wrong.
Do tell me.
And it's very, very simple how to get out of this. And I'll start with Lawrence Kasdan, who was, I'm going to meet him, Aspen Design Conference, I think. You know who he is, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Big Chill director. He was giving his talk, and he said, people say there are only 7 stories, or there are only 5 stories. You know, the Lost Prince, or the little guy with the big burden, or whatever. He said, no, that's not true. There are only 2. Somebody goes on a trip, or somebody comes to town.
That's
right. Fine, that's story. Plot and story are totally different things. Once you understand this, your mind will be completely free. I didn't invent this, but look, take The Lord of the Rings. It's always, from beginning to end, the same story. It's the story of the little guy with the big burden. That's the story. The story is the emotional, unchanging story. The plot changes. It's physical. It changes on this page. Here he's in the Shire. Here he's being chased by people. Here he's in the mines of Moria. Here he's in Mordor. The plot is the physical thing. The plot is also the story of the little guy with the big burden. That's generic. The plot of The Lord of the Rings is specific. It's this specific little guy with his specific big burden. You see where I'm going with this? So emotional versus physical, specific against generic, and static against ever-changing. Once you realize this, you go, well, yeah, if it's this, some people have written this story before, but no one's ever written this plot. No one's ever written your plot.
And that was kind of why I was
stuck with that nonsense.
Well, no, that's why I was kind of saying it's the execution. It's the execution, because you're changing things. It's like, in the second book I wrote, I use a fake romance trope, okay? But here's the thing. Most fake romances in romance novels is they set this couple up and then they fall madly in love, but it was all supposed to be fake. No. I make it basically where there's a contract involved. This guy wants her to he'll give her this, but she has to marry him. And then she has to stay married to him for 5 years.
Right. See, that's your plot.
Exactly. And so that's the thing. It's like, the same thing. If every romance novel, and that long time ago, that's one of the things that they talked about in romance novels. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl again. Okay, that's fine, but it gets redundant, and you have to, as you said, you have to change what is driving the plot? What is driving these people?
Yeah, exactly.
So I get
it. There are certain, with a certain simple rules in romantic fiction, for romantic comedy, for example. I went to acting class at Beverly Hills Playhouse to learn how to direct actors. Very, very good teacher, Milton Katsalis, Jeffrey Tambor, who's now,
I know Jeff. Well, I don't know him personally, but I know who you're talking about.
Very, very good teachers and really helpful education for a director. Where am I going with this?
We're talking about romantic writing.
Yeah, okay, Milton, thank you. Milton said, what you do in romantic comedy is you put the lovers up a tree and you throw rocks at them. That's just great. Good. You throw rocks at them for 90 minutes, and then there's your ending, happy or otherwise. But every plot is different. And when I tell this to people, like young writers and students and people I've mentored, or just talking to people, it just opens their eyes. They go, oh, of course, yeah. And they just don't worry about it being the story. It's your plot. No, exactly. And you don't know what's going to happen. This is when it gets exciting and when it gets baffling, and when you've got to let the story or the plot tell itself to you where it wants to go and get out of its way. That's a fascinating business.
I think that's the hardest thing is going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's like we get in our own way.
Yes.
Because we want, and there's 2 schools here, because there's the part where you're trying to create the story, but then there's the part where you've finished writing the story, you've had it edited, and you're reviewing it, and you're going, well, wait a second, is it really ready to go? I have a box over on the other side of my desk that contains a 30-year novel. I joke about it. And when I've been writing my other books, my friends are like, well, don't throw away the scenes that you haven't used. I'm like, I got a box over here that I will borrow stuff from if I need to.
Yeah.
Because that's sometimes it's the overpainting. It's anything for a creative that we don't want to send it out into the world because it's not perfect.
Well, perfection is the enemy of art, especially in acting. Don't try and be perfect in acting. Just try and be real. Just let the scene tell itself. No, perfection really is a killer. What you're after is life, and life isn't perfect. And one of the reasons we like fantasy and it's having its big boom now is because real life is so baffling and confusing and right on shitty sometimes, especially the big world out there, that it's really nice to escape to somewhere where the problems are more colorful, more simple, more entertaining than grim old reality.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about, let's go here. And I know it seems like a really far stretch, but if you think about why soap operas were so popular for so long, because women could sit there and look at these other women and go, they're either their lives were so much better or their lives were so much worse, and they had that time to escape from their daily lives.
Yeah.
So, and as we've expanded the world with different things for women and women taking a place in the workplace and everything, soap operas, while some are still popular, they have dwindled.
You're
Because they're looking for a different escape.
They're still working. You know,
oh yeah, but I mean, not as
stuff that she likes.
when I was in high school. I think
And comfort food as well.
Yeah,
that's where you go to. It's like sometimes I reread a book I haven't read for a while because I just to relax rather than forging out into a new thing that I don't know anything about.
How hard is it for you to? I mean, I know for me, how hard is it for you to watch something and not figure out the plot like before it even gets close to the end?
It's not very, I find it quite hard. My wife can do it really well because she's seen a lot of soap operas. She knows every twist and turn. So, oh, of course, this is going to happen. I said, wait, I want to find out what can happen. Because, quite often I don't watch much TV because it's kind of a bit like work. Having worked in that business, it's your sort of part of you switches on to a different, why are they doing it like that? It's not, But I saw a series recently, a Wednesday. Did you see that?
No, I did not.
Oh God, it's brilliant. I was walking through my wife's TV room to my office, which is next door. She said, "This one you've got to watch." And I said, "Must I?" And so I sat down and I watched the first episode. God, I was just blown away by the quality of the writing, which is the people who are writing now in their 20s and 30s have had a lifetime's education watching great television.
Mm-hmm.
They're masters by the time they hit the business. And we didn't have that when we were growing up. We were learning a bit, but we were encouraged to go off and have a life and then write about it. And we haven't been immersed in fantastic quality television since the golden age. And it was just so well done. And the girl who's the lead is extraordinary. And they subverted all the tropes, all the obvious things were twisted nicely. And it was very benign. I don't like horror. I'm not a horror fan, but gothic comic horror like the Addams Family, that really floats my boat. That's lovely. And Tim Burton, I mean, what more could you want?
Tim Burton's brilliant.
I can't wait till the next season.
I just finished Barry, which is on Max or HBO, whichever you want to call it. But it was a different show. It was about a hitman who decides he wants to be an actor.
Oh right, yes, I've read about that. Is it good?
It was. I enjoyed it. Henry Winkler, because I grew up with Henry Winkler being the Fonz. So seeing him as this older gentleman, as this acting teacher who is so egocentric.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's the one I've heard about.
Yeah.
I'm working with a producer in LA at the moment who knows Winkler very well. Says he's everyone adores him in real life.
It was done really, really well. The guy who plays NoHo Hank, I mean, there's different little bits and it's odd. And there's moments where you're like, what am I watching? And there is some blood, I will say that. But it was amusing. And it got a lot of Emmy noms too, from what I saw.
Good.
But I'm like you, when it comes to horror, I am not a horror fan. If you give me something like Zombieland that has humor with my horror, then I can, or Shaun of the Dead, I can watch that, but otherwise.
But that is, get back to my book, but it's so interesting to me that it was absolutely natural that comedy kept cropping up, that things go terribly wrong, there are disasters and misunderstandings, and that is like Shaun of the Dead. There's comedy in it because I mean, Hitchcock used to do this. He'd scare you, then make you laugh. If you just keep scaring people, you get the law of diminishing returns. It stops being scary. If you make them laugh and relax them and then scare them, Hitchcock is the master of that. So it's a very natural fit that a bizarre new world should have a lot of bizarre new things in it. And so, I like that comparison with Shaun of the Dead. That's good fun, yeah.
I mean, when you look at life, sometimes even through our worst moments, if we can turn around and find humor in them,
Yes, yeah.
it makes it more manageable.
What did I read recently? Oh, yes, Nigella Lawson, the English cook and writer, very talented. Her husband died some years ago, and she got a condolence letter from Harold Pinter, one of my great heroes. Fantastic writer, playwright, and film writer as well. And it read something like this: "Dear Nigella, I was so sorry to read about your loss. I understand that your husband saw one of my plays 2 nights before he died, and that he really enjoyed it." And she and her friends were just sort of reading this and weeping with laughter. It's a well-meaning condolence letter that was all about him.
Well, when my grandmother passed, because I was my mom had already passed, so I was taking care of my grandma. When my grandmother passed, she wanted me to donate something to organ donation. I was like, okay. So I'm in the middle of my grief. My grandmother was 76 years old, and they're asking me questions like, so did your grandmother ever sell her body for drugs? Did your grandmother ever sell her body for sex? And I'm sitting there with the visual of my grandmother with a cane on the corner trying to pick up somebody. And I start laughing, and I'm just like, thank you. And she's like, what? I said, you made me laugh. In the moment of grief, you made me laugh because here I am trying to see my grandmother doing this. So I'm like,
I rest your case. Comedy crops up in all the weirdest places, and thank God for it. And where would we be without? Apparently, laughter is a lot older than language.
Really?
I think it was Jimmy Carr or some comedian like that. I was watching a podcast with him, and it's long before we could communicate with words. We used the laughter was a part of our communication skills, which is actually kind of interesting.
It is.
Not many other species have it that I know. Well, hyenas, but they don't count.
Well, there's a bird that sounds like it's always laughing.
Oh, the kookaburra,
yeah.
But it probably means something completely different to them. Like,
true. Yeah. So, what is your next project? I know you just released the first book. When is the next book coming out in the series?
Next book, I think, comes out in November 2024, according to the publisher. I'll be seeing him there's a convention coming up in Boston in a couple of weeks, Bosco, which is I'm looking forward to very much. I've written the film script. I was having lunch with the producer today, which doesn't mean anything until it happens, but basically he's bought the rights and likes it, is trying to get it off the ground, and early stages. I'm still writing book 5 in the series. I've also got a television series that's talking of zombies, that's risen from the grave, rather, something that I wrote a few years ago for one producer, and a showrunner's come in and really likes it, so it's looking that might happen. I've written all the script for it. Nice. So now I'll bring in other writers to update what I did before, and that can be fun. It's always nice to be in production. Well, but again, it's all what you do as a writer is you just keep writing. And we're lucky that we're not like actors where we need a soundstage, or we need a theatre, or we need a script. All you need is a computer, or a piece of paper and a pencil. Sure. And you can do your art. So in a way, we're very lucky. But we are, of course, one stage removed from when we go into production. Even though I'll be part of the production team on this, you take a back seat, and it becomes the director's room. It becomes the actor's property. You don't want, like, for example, going back to Rowan Atkinson. If you don't want someone looking through Rowan performing and thinking, who wrote this? Right. You want the audience thinking, this guy is, this is a real person.
He's brilliant.
You don't need to see, where did the words come from? That would be distracting. So that's part of the fun of being a writer, is handing it off to someone else. Sure. So that'd be nice if that happens. Otherwise, I'm just I found my bliss as a writer, late in my career, and I couldn't be happier.
I have 2 questions for you about your project here, because one person I talked to recently, they're turning their fantasy book into an actual game, of virtual reality game. Would that ever be something you might consider?
Um, I wouldn't know how to do it. What I do know is friends of mine actually live in Sweden, and they're designers of video graphics, and not just for games, but for things like, well, I mean, for slot machines in Las Vegas. There's all the cut scenes in there and the graphics, and that's all computer generated. The art is brilliant, and the weak point in gaming is the writing. And that's not to disrespect my fellow writers. The point is that the genre is so circumscribed by what's written that you can only really have these two quests: go and kill something, go and fetch something. And however well it's written, with the dialogue and the possibilities and the interaction between you, the player, and what's already written, at the moment it's far more limited than writing a book. So if somebody wanted to take my books and turn them into a game, I wouldn't be anything but a consultant. I wouldn't be qualified to write. I wouldn't want to write them, because that's already, I'm working in a better medium. But if somebody wanted to take them, well, why not? I mean,
what about audiobooks?
What was the other question?
What about audiobooks? Are you going to turn it into?
I've done the audiobook of the first one. And that was nice, and that's actually kind of interesting because I'm not a professional actor, and when I was with a producer friend in LA, who was one of my test readers, I said, well, who should we get to read the book? And he said, well, when I read it, I hear your voice. You should do it. And so I go, oh, okay. So I had a very good producer called Fred Sanders, who did the Game of Thrones book. He did the last one anyway, with Roy Dotrice. And so Fred really steered me through it. He's a very good reader, actor, producer. And I was saying to him at the beginning, look, I'm completely confident of anything I'm writing. I can go into a room full of producers and fellow writers and contribute and listen and not get in the way and take my notes and deliver. I'm a little bit less confident as a performer, so you might have to, pat me on the head and say, you're doing okay from time to time, which he did. And so I really, really enjoyed it, because I loved reading to my daughter when she was a child. Mm-hmm. Trouble is, she started reading so early that she sort of kicked me out of the bedroom after she was about 7. So I never got beyond one of Philip Pullman's books, because she was, oh, I finished that one, I'm on the next one now.
You're like, darn.
In the morning, dear. Yeah. But I did love reading to her and doing all the voices. And so I just let rip with that. I'll be doing the audiobook of the sequel this summer, because that's got to be ready for the publication date. And just keeping on writing until I run out of ideas.
Which you'll never do. You'll never do.
You never know. You've got to do this. It's got to be the same but different. You've got to keep repeating what people want in terms of the genre and the feel. If George R.R. Martin suddenly in book 6 sets it in Mars in the future, all us fans are going to be going, what?
Oh, do you mean?
You've got to stick in the groove, but you can't keep repeating the same effects and the same stories. So you've got to be the same but different.
Like Highlander. The first Highlander movie was great. I mean, it was, for what it was at the time. It's bad and cheesy now, but for what it was at the time, it was great. But then the second movie, I think it was, we are on the planet Zeist.
Highlander 2, terrible. Yeah, that was. We don't talk about that. But there are some sequels that are just so bad. Mm-hmm. To beloved books or beloved films, and then there's things like Alien 2, which was probably better than the original in some ways.
Well, I like Empire better than I love Star Wars, don't get me wrong, but I like Empire better than I like Star Wars.
Star Wars is a perfect example of them working in the same genre, doing the same but different, trying to keep it fresh, often succeeding and not equally often failing. Very, very difficult to keep something that a balloon like that, or juggling all those balls in the air at once. But yeah, who isn't a Star Wars fan?
Well, okay, I have to ask this real quick. So, did you read the Timothy Zahn books?
No, I don't know the name.
Timothy Zahn wrote Star Wars books after Star Wars, after the first trilogy. Really? And those books have some really great characters in it. And when they announced that they were going to do the next, the last 3, it was just like, okay, if you go with that, you got, and that's what really upset a lot of fans, because he created this world and he had Palpatine, and he had all these other characters, and he had this female Jedi who was dark called Mara Jade, and Mara Jade actually ends up, her and Luke Skywalker end up together, but she's evil. She's like the Emperor's right hand. And so you had this to work with. They even made a toy of her.
That sounds a lot better than the films.
Yeah. And then they did this and it was just kind of like, what?
Well, you know, the thing with Star Wars is the fans are so loyal and also so myopic that it has to be like this. And it has to cross this I and dot this T and deliver exactly that, or it's not a real Star Wars, which is bonkers.
It's crazy. Yeah.
That's the tail wagging the dog. The great caveat to this is that I think it was, who was in Columbia, the Fox, I think, sent people out onto the streets with clipboards asking members of the public, would you like to see a film about an alien that lands on Earth and it crash lands and the Americans hunt it down and some kids rescue it and hide it in a cupboard and all he wants to do is get home and people said no, they didn't like the sound of that, so they passed on E.T. The point is, it's not up to the public to have the ideas. It's up to the creators to have the ideas, and then the public says, wow, thank you for that wonderful film, which E.T. was. And you don't put the cart before the horse.
Right. I don't hate the last Star Wars movies. I wish they would have done the other ones. I'm not that hardcore fan going, well, this just sucked. Well, I mean, they weren't what I wanted, but they weren't bad either. And the only thing I have to say about the first trilogy was you killed Darth Maul off way too soon.
Okay.
Because I really liked him. I liked him being a bad guy. But
you probably didn't like it when they chopped Eddard Stark's head off in the Game of Thrones.
Actually,
that was so brave. That was so brave.
I never have watched Game of Thrones.
Well, I was terrified because I thought, oh, they're going to ruin this. You know, the legend of George Martin is that he, after Beauty and the Beast, he said, I fed up with Hollywood. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go and write something that's so big nobody will ever film it. And look what happens. So I'd read the books by the time the series came out, and I was worried, like any fan is, that it was not going to be very good. And it really was very good up until the last season, which we don't talk about. There was, it really was, and considering it's only about 20% of the books is in the show, it was extremely well done. Some casting things I had issues with, but who wouldn't? Just like, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Everyone has a different vision in their heads of the Shire and the Hobbits, but he really brought it all together really well. I was perfectly happy with his vision.
Well, I mean, Interview with the Vampire, Tom Cruise's Lestat was not on my radar at all. But, talking about Game of Thrones, when I wrote My Days with the Dark Muse, I've been told that this guy is one of the vilest person you will ever read about. I'm like, okay. And I was told by several people that read the book when it first started, there's no way you're ever going to redeem him. Never, ever will you redeem him. So I wrote my second and third book, and I had people going, Team Nigel all the way. And I'm like, well, I guess I did my job. And I think that's going back to
Nigel's the bad guy, is he?
He's not really a bad guy. He's just a misunderstood musician. He's got a coke problem. It's the 80s. What can I say? I mean,
is he Nigel Tufnell from Spinal Tap?
No. No, darn.
Another Spinal Tap film. I'm so excited.
I heard that. No, he is Nigel Hartigan. So, but yeah, I think that's what, when you're talking about the audience factor, it's like, here, these people are reading the book and they're like, there's no way you'll ever redeem him. Okay. Here, hold my tea. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's very judgmental. I mean, how do you back out of a book in the middle of a story and say, no, you let the story tell itself and then you. A lot of people don't read very deeply. It's quite a skill, actually. Yeah. So how will you ever redeem? Oh, that's a great question. I want to see how you redeem him. That's the exciting thing about getting a problem like that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, how many characters do we experience in movies, TVs, books where they are just somebody that we love to hate? And that was one of my things about it. It was like, you're saying it's too dark and he's such an evil character, but how many characters have we seen in our world that we just love to hate?
Well, who do you remember from Dallas?
J.R. Ewing,
from Dynasty, Joan Collins, whatever her name, Crystal,
Alexis Carrington.
I was going to say Crystal Knock, but that's not very good.
Alexis
really
was her name, yeah.
Alexis, yeah. I mean, she was just she picked that part up and ran with it, didn't she?
Mm-hmm.
This is great.
And that's the thing, when you get having a villain that is notable is going to push the envelope. It's going to make you remember.
Yeah. One of the rules in writing is that your villains have got to be much more powerful than your heroes. The heroes have to be overmatched, not standard, under-equipped, lost, you know. And there's, I mean, look at The Hobbit versus Mordor. Sauron, who you never saw, I always call him Sauron, but apparently he's Sauron, according to the pronunciation guide. You know, you never see the guy, but he's massive, and there's tiny little Frodo and tiny little Sam pottering along, exhausted. That's the right dynamic. If your hero is more powerful than your villain, you have an unbalanced story.
Mm-hmm. So, on that note, is there anything that we did not discuss that you would like to say?
Well, if you're interested in my book, you can go to richardsparks.com and download or listen to a free chapter of me reading a chapter, or download a chapter for you to read. So it's an audio chapter and a separate chapter that's free for you. You can sample it, so then you can see if it appeals to you. That's about it. And if it does, there's 3 more on the runway waiting to be edited and sorted out. And just got the book cover for the second book. The designer is a Norwegian artist woman who lives in Glasgow. She's just brilliant. And the first book cover, I absolutely love what she's done. The second book's come out and go, yeah. We'll be doing a cover reveal eventually. That's what you do these days on
yes
social media. So
there is one thing you didn't talk about. You wanted to talk about your editor, and I don't think we actually covered that.
Yeah, Leslie Robin. She's the executive editor at Kasich, the science fiction fantasy house that have published my book. And she is extraordinary. I mean, I've done a lot of script editing myself. I've worked both sides of the table. And I love the whole editing process because, as all script writers and producers know, editing's where you get the gold. It's when you really bring the script into shape. And so to get right from the beginning, when my agent said, you know, this is the sort of book that people want these days, you know, I'll see what I can do with it. I said, oh, just get me a great editor. That's all I want. Right at the beginning. So when Kasich offered to publish it, I was in Dallas. My wife had a show there. She's a designer artist. And there was a Zoom call set up between Leslie, the editor, the publisher, Shahed Mahmood, and my agent, Julia, and me. And like 5 minutes before it, I saw there was an email from Leslie. I thought, well, I better open this before. Because the premise that, I mean, they would publish me on condition I did a developmental edit. I said, great, bring me on, I'm ready, you know. I mean, you know, they're worried in case I was a precious writer who didn't want anyone to interfere with their glorious work. No, that's not how we think in the script business. So I read Leslie's the notes on the first 6 pages of the book, and there was like massive, great paragraphs on the side where she'd put a line around something, not something was wrong or anything, but go and then explain how she worked. You know, that's really interesting. But the first actual note she gave on the script, my jaw fell. I go, that's brilliant. That's incredible. The first actual detailed note. And the first detailed note was, cut the first line of the book. I mean, it takes real insight to see that. Something you haven't really read the whole thing. And I'll tell you why it's good, because she said, that second line, that's your first line. And the first line was something like, the next few minutes we knew would change our lives forever. So that's sort of flannelly set up. And the second line is, nobody remembers who comes second. She said, that's your first line. That says you're in a contest. That says you're in a problem. Nobody remembers who comes second. Lead with that. And I go, okay, I'm in good hands here. And she was very encouraging. She said, you know, I want more of this. You haven't gone far enough with this relationship between this inanimate object and this character. That's a real person. People are going to love this thing that's just an object. I want one myself. You know, more. So I was going, yeah, sure. And we were sort of halfway there. So you know, really getting the writer to fulfill things that the writer hasn't seen for themselves is a gift, as well as her ability to, you know, to cut out things that were redundant, or to say, you've already said that earlier, the obvious editing things. So I couldn't be more happy to be in her hands, and looking forward to getting her notes on the second book.
That's awesome. It's good to have a good editor. It really is. So,
yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, Richard. It's been a fabulous conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Donna. That's lovely.
You might have heard my voice hosting the Better To podcast, but did you know I'm also the mastermind behind the Better To Burnout book series? The stories unravel the lives of Nigel Hartigan, the groovy bassist of Sambuca Fedora, the stunning singer-model Ava Richards, and the suave record executive singer Russell Langford. Love, romance, and drama run rampant as their lives tangle up. But brace yourself, folks, because not every tale has a happy ending. Snag your copy today from most online booksellers. The conversation with Richard was almost like a masterclass at times because he had so much information of everything that he's done and the stories that he shared about Rowan Atkinson and Douglas Adams. Those things are priceless, and they're stories that, how do I say, that you're not going to hear every day. And, you know, it's true that sometimes as a writer, especially as an author, we do not want to release that grasp on our book. We don't want to release it and let somebody else tweak it and change it. And I went through that process initially when, you know, I didn't actually hold on to days so tight. It was more of the other books that I had a bit of an issue with, that I was just kind of like, I'm not sure I'm ready for this. And that was back with the 30-year novel. Every other book, it's like if somebody has a suggestion, I try to lean into it and see how I can improve it and make it better. And Richard, I mean, he has a long, extensive history in a lot of different fields in the entertainment industry, all dealing with writing. And that's the aspect. We can't look at just, you are a writer and you write this. It goes back to, once again, don't put yourself in a box. Don't put yourself, you know, as we were talking about role playing games, you are what you say you are. You create this. You have, if you're an orc, you're an orc. If you're a unicorn, you're a unicorn. People see you as that, where don't pigeonhole yourself. It's like when I left my job, as an insurance supervisor, claim supervisor, I had to go through this whole process of losing that identity. And we look so many times outside of ourselves about our identity. You know, I am this, I am that, I am married, I am single, I am divorced, I am widowed, I am this religion, I am this race. And it's like, guess what? I'm me. And granted, maybe all those things make up me. Maybe they're a part of me. But as I was talking to somebody recently about the fact that, well, how long after I'm divorced do I become single again? And, you know, when am I no longer a widow? I'm single. I've been a widow for 4 years, but when do I become single again? Or am I always going to be a widow for the rest of my life? And I mean, it's ridiculous, because that doesn't make me who I am. Sure, I went through that loss, just like if you went through a divorce, you went through that loss, and that may have changed you, but it should not change your label. It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't be on my car insurance. It shouldn't be on my medical records, because you're sitting there saying, you went through this, so therefore you get this. It's not necessarily true. And I think we have to look at that as being a writer. You know, when do you become a writer? We talked about that. You become a writer or an author as soon as you start writing. Because if you have a story to tell, you've authored that story and it's your creation. So if you take anything away from what Richard talked about, think about this. Think about all the things that he did. And just like when I wrote Immortal Love, my short story, I went into that project with the fact that I thought to myself, I'm going to do this and I'm going to win that contest, because I put my thought process into making this the best thing I could make and releasing it out into the world. but putting that energy and that manifestation energy into it, that I can do this and this is how the outcome's going to be. So on that note, if you are a writer / author, do what you got to do to create what you need to create. Make the world your oyster and create your own world, because that's what you're doing when you're writing a story. Whether it be a script or a book, you're creating a world. So create the world you want and embrace it, enjoy it. And guess what? It's your escape. And you know what? In you creating that escape, you're creating an escape for somebody else. So on that note, I'd like to thank Fast Susie for the music, for the intro and outro music. And I'd like to thank Rich Zai from Third Year Audio for doing the podcast audio, as always. And of course, I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. I always appreciated you. And if you have a question about the podcast, or you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please drop me an email at Donna, DAUNA, at dmneedom.com, or Donna at better2podcast.com. Either way, you will get in touch with me. So on that note, I hope whenever you're listening to this podcast, whether it be evening, morning, weekend, whenever, I hope you enjoy it. And thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.